I am Hazel. I am 31 years old. For nearly 2 entire years, the woman who gave birth to me dragged my name through the most vicious, humiliating legal mud imaginable. She spent hundreds of days sitting in immaculate courtrooms and exclusive social clubs, aggressively spinning a narrative that I was a calculating, cold-blooded predator. She claimed I was an ungrateful, manipulative granddaughter who had brainwashed a helpless, senile old woman into handing over a massive fortune. But there was one massive, catastrophic detail my mother was completely unaware of. My grandmother had been meticulously preparing for this exact battle for a very, very long time. And when I finally uncovered the hidden room deep inside her historic coastal estate, a room that had been perfectly sealed away for decades, the entire universe shifted on its axis. Before I dive into the dark depths of this story, if you find yourself connecting with narratives about surviving toxic family dynamics and uncovering long-buried truths, please take a moment to engage with this content. But I ask that you only do so if you genuinely want to follow along on this journey. I would also love to know exactly who is listening to my voice right now. Please drop a comment letting me know what city you are tuning in from and what time the clock is currently showing in your part of the world. Now, I need to pull you backward in time. Let me take you back exactly 2.5 years to the terrifying, rain-swept morning my grandmother was admitted to the intensive care unit for the absolute last time. The jarring phone call came at exactly 6:45 on a dreary Tuesday morning. Miss Hazel, the clinical voice on the line stated, "This is the Central Coastal Medical Center. Your grandmother, Eleanor, has just been rushed into our care. Severe, late-stage congestive heart failure." I was living in the arid desert of the Southwest at the time, but I managed to secure a seat on a commercial flight within 3 hours. For the entire duration of that turbulent flight, my hands absolutely refused to stop shaking. Grandmother Eleanor was well into her late 80s, but to my mind, she had always seemed entirely invincible. She was the remarkable woman who had patiently taught me how to cultivate rare orchids. She was the fierce protector who had held my trembling body when I cried myself to sleep as a tiny child, on the exact, agonizing night my biological mother had packed a suitcase and walked out the front door. When I finally sprinted through the sliding glass doors of the sterile hospital, my mother was already standing in the pristine hallway. Veronica was in her mid-50s, sporting expensive, salon-fresh blonde highlights, a premium silk scarf draped flawlessly around her neck, and a posture that radiated pure arrogance. She was deeply engaged in conversation with the attending physician. She absolutely did not acknowledge my frantic arrival. She did not offer a comforting glance, nor a subtle nod. I approached them incredibly slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Mom," I whispered, interrupting the medical consultation. "How's her condition?" Veronica finally turned her head. Her cold, calculating eyes swept over my exhausted, travel-worn appearance exactly as if I were a repulsive stain on the hospital wallpaper. "Oh, you actually managed to make the trip." Her voice was pure, unadulterated ice. "I honestly assumed you were far too consumed with your little architectural career to bother showing up." "She is my grandmother," I replied, my voice shaking. "She is my mother," Veronica snapped back instantly. She aggressively turned her attention back to the physician, completely dismissing my existence. As I was stating, "Doctor, I will require comprehensive copies of absolutely all her recent medical charting." I tentatively tried again. "Can I please just go inside and see her?" Veronica spoke directly to the hovering triage nurse without even bothering to look at my face. "Only immediate, verified family members are permitted inside the room right now. The patient requires absolute rest and zero agitation." The young nurse glanced back and forth between us, visibly confused by the hostility. "Ma'am, isn't this young woman her?" "She is absolutely not immediate family." Veronica's smile was razor-thin and venomous. "Not really anyway." Those 2 words hit my chest with the physical force of a swinging bat. I had spent decades being fiercely raised and protected by grandmother Eleanor, and yet, to the woman who actually birthed me, I was not considered real family. I stood entirely paralyzed in that blindingly bright, sterile hallway, watching my mother confidently push open the heavy door to my grandmother's private room and disappear inside. The door clicked shut with a heavy, final sound. In that exact moment of suffocating isolation, I finally realized a truth that should have been glaringly obvious for my entire life. To Veronica, I had absolutely never been a daughter. I was simply a historical inconvenience she had gleefully abandoned decades ago. I sat rigidly in the waiting area and bided my time until Veronica finally departed the ward to secure an expensive lunch. The absolute second I watched her blonde hair disappear into the descending elevator, I silently slipped past the nurse's station and crept into grandmother Eleanor's dim room. The medical monitors beeped with a soft, terrifying rhythm. Dozens of translucent tubes and thick wires connected her frail, shrinking body to massive machines that seemed entirely too loud and violent for someone so inherently gentle. But the exact moment her heavy eyelids fluttered open and her eyes found my face, they brilliantly lit up like the breaking dawn. My beautiful, sweet girl. Her voice was reduced to a fragile, raspy whisper, but it carried an immense, undeniable warmth. You actually came to me. I gently reached out and took her hand. Her skin felt exactly like crinkled tissue paper, but her physical grip was surprisingly, fiercely strong. Of course I came, Grandma. I would never be anywhere else. She took a shallow, rattling breath. Do not, she paused, her chest violently heaving as she struggled to catch a sufficient breath. Do not believe a single, solitary word Veronica tells you about my mental state. I am infinitely sharper than she arrogantly assumes. I gently squeezed her fragile fingers. I know you are, Grandma. Eleanor's cloudy eyes slowly drifted toward the dark window. The hidden sanctuary. Harrison's old study. You must remember this, Hazel. If you ever desperately need the answers to the puzzle. Harrison was my late grandfather, a brilliant man who had tragically passed away long before I was even born. I had heard countless, mythical stories about his legendary private study, but I had absolutely never seen a separate, locked room anywhere inside the sprawling coastal manor. Grandma, I genuinely do not understand what you are trying to tell me. The heavy door violently swung open behind me. Veronica stood aggressively in the doorway, a steaming paper cup of premium coffee clutched in her hand, her furious eyes immediately locking onto our intertwined fingers. What exactly are you doing sneaking around in here? Her voice carried that highly familiar, terrifying edge of aggressive accusation. I am simply visiting my dying grandmother, I stated quietly. Veronica abruptly turned to address the nervous nurse who had followed her into the room. Do you clearly see this behavior? This is exactly the manipulative tactic I was explicitly warning you about. She pointed a long, manicured finger directly at my chest. She is perpetually attempting to aggressively isolate my vulnerable mother from the rest of the family. This is absolute, textbook elder manipulation. The young nurse's facial expression instantly shifted. She looked at me entirely differently now, her eyes clouded with deep, professional suspicion. I opened my mouth to fiercely defend my character, but Grandmother Eleanor aggressively squeezed my hand. It was a silent, desperate warning. Stay completely calm. Do not engage. I was just preparing to leave the room anyway, I said quietly, gently resting Eleanor's hand back onto the mattress. As I silently walked past Veronica toward the hallway, she leaned in close and murmured a sentence so incredibly quiet that only my ears could catch the words. I have meticulously recorded absolutely everything, Hazel. Everything. The cryptic words made absolutely zero logical sense to my panicked brain in that specific moment. But they undeniably would very soon. Exactly 3 agonizing days later, Grandmother Eleanor peacefully passed away in her sleep. I was fiercely holding her fragile hand when the transition occurred. The cardiac monitors emitted a long, flat, screaming tone at exactly 22 minutes past 3 in the morning. The medical staff frantically rushed into the room, but I intimately knew it was already over. Her fierce grip had permanently loosened. The brilliant, sharp light behind her eyes was permanently extinguished. Veronica arrived at the hospital a full 2 hours later. 2 entire hours. She violently burst through the heavy double doors dressed in impeccable, full morning attire. A tailored black designer dress, massive dark sunglasses pushed stylishly atop her head. She dramatically collapsed at the edge of the hospital bed in a spectacular display of manufactured grief. "Mama. Oh, my precious mama. I am so profoundly sorry I was not present for your final moments." She sobbed incredibly loudly, aggressively clutching the sterile hospital sheets. "I absolutely should have been sitting right here. I should have held you." The theatrical performance was absolutely flawless. The attending nurses exchanged deeply sympathetic glances. A young, naive orderly rushed to bring her a box of tissues. I stood silently in the corner and said absolutely nothing. What possible words were there to say to a monster? Exactly 1 week later, the surviving family members gathered in the intimidating, mahogany-paneled law offices of Silas Vance for the official reading of the last will and testament. The sprawling room smelled aggressively of aged leather, dusty legal texts, and generations of old, coastal money. Seated around the massive conference table were Veronica and her current husband, Arthur, a former corporate real estate broker who possessed incredibly nervous, darting eyes and a notoriously weak, clammy handshake. Aunt Beatrice, Veronica's significantly younger, deeply intimidated sister, sat completely rigid in the far corner. A small scattering of distant, greedy cousins I barely recognized filled the remaining plush seats. Attorney Silas Vance was in his late 60s. He possessed thick silver hair and the incredibly calm, unshakable demeanor of a legal professional who had personally witnessed absolutely every conceivable variation of horrific family drama. He had served faithfully as grandmother Eleanor's private attorney for over 3 decades. He slowly cleared his throat, adjusted his reading glasses, and began to read from the heavy parchment. "I, Eleanor Margaret, being of absolute sound mind and capable body, do hereby legally bequeath." The massive room went completely, terrifyingly silent. Veronica aggressively leaned forward in her leather chair, her eyes shining with greedy anticipation. "My primary, historic residence located on the coastal cliffs, currently valued at a market rate of $6.8 million, along with absolutely all of its physical contents and surrounding acreage. To my beloved granddaughter, Hazel Clara." The heavy silence was violently shattered. Veronica's ceramic coffee cup slipped from her hands and violently shattered against the hardwood floor. "To my biological daughter, Veronica Beatrice, I legally leave the final sum of exactly $1. Veronica erupted from her chair exactly like a volatile volcano that had been lying dormant for decades. "No." She aggressively slammed both of her palms flat down onto the polished mahogany table. "This is absolute, verifiable fraud." Silas Vance remained entirely impassive. "Madam, I must strongly ask that you please contain your—" "Do not you dare attempt to silence me," Veronica shrieked. She violently whirled around to face me, a shaking finger jabbing aggressively through the air in my direction. "You! What exactly did you maliciously do to her mind? What sick, twisted lies did you whisper into her ear while she was heavily drugged up and actively dying in that hospital bed?" I kept my vocal tone incredibly level and calm. "I did absolutely nothing to her." "Liar!" Spittle literally flew from her lips as she screamed. Arthur desperately attempted to grab her arm and pull her back down into her seat, but she violently shook his grip off. My aging mother suffered from severe, late-stage dementia. She absolutely did not possess the cognitive capacity to comprehend what she was signing. Silas spoke calmly, his voice easily cutting through her hysteria. "Madam, your mother was rigorously, medically evaluated by her primary, certified physician prior to executing these changes. She was completely, undeniably of sound, legal mind when—" "Her primary physician?" Veronica let out a sharp, incredibly ugly, barking laugh. "Exactly who are you referring to? Some corrupt doctor she aggressively paid off?" She pointed her shaking finger directly at me again. "Or perhaps some unethical hack that this greedy little gold digger successfully bribed." Aunt Beatrice shifted incredibly uncomfortably in the corner of the room, but she absolutely refused to open her mouth and intervene. The distant cousins actively exchanged wide-eyed, horrified glances. Veronica aggressively turned to address the entire room, spreading her arms wide, perfectly playing to her captive audience. "My beloved mother fiercely loved me. She would absolutely never, under any rational circumstances, permanently cut me out of her financial legacy. This girl, her voice dripped with pure, unadulterated venom, maliciously manipulated a helpless, senile old woman. This is the absolute definition of elder abuse. This is calculated coercion. The final will is entirely, legally valid, Silas stated with absolute finality. It was properly witnessed by 2 independent parties, heavily notarized, and flawlessly filed with the municipal court. Veronica slowly straightened her spine, seemingly composing her erratic breathing with visible, immense effort. When she finally spoke again, her vocal tone had gone completely cold, calculating, and terrifyingly lethal. "We will absolutely let the federal courts decide the validity of that claim, will we not?" She aggressively gathered her expensive designer purse. "I am officially contesting this fraudulent document. I will aggressively have it declared entirely null and void. And when I am finally finished dismantling the charade, absolutely everyone in this city will know exactly what kind of monstrous predator my supposed granddaughter truly is." She paused dramatically at the heavy oak door, looking back over her shoulder at me with a smile that absolutely did not reach her dead eyes. "I will see you in federal court, sweetheart." The heavy door slammed violently shut behind her. Following the explosive confrontation, the massive conference room emptied out incredibly quickly. Arthur hurriedly scurried out the door after Veronica without casting a single backward glance. The distant, greedy cousins awkwardly mumbled pathetic excuses and rapidly fled the building. Only Aunt Beatrice lingered behind. She hesitantly approached my chair, nervously wringing her hands together. "Hazel, I honestly do not even know what to say to you." "You absolutely do not have to say a single thing, Aunt Beatrice," I replied softly. She nervously glanced toward the closed door exactly as if she were terrified Veronica might violently burst back into the room. Veronica is my biological sister. I am socially obligated to stand by her side during this conflict. You completely understand the dynamics, right?" I understood it with absolute, heartbreaking clarity. Biological blood over the undeniable truth. Societal appearances over actual reality. That was the eternal, unspoken motto of this family. "Of course I understand," I stated incredibly quietly. Beatrice practically sprinted out of the room without uttering another syllable. Silas began meticulously gathering his scattered legal paperwork. "Miss Hazel, I desperately want you to fully comprehend that this is going to be an incredibly brutal, exhausting legal battle. Veronica possesses massive financial resources through her husband. She will intentionally drag this process out for years. I explicitly know that, Silas. But the legal document is entirely solid. Your grandmother was meticulous about ensuring that fact." He paused, intensely studying my face. "She loved your soul very, very deeply. That night, I aggressively drove to the coastal manor completely alone. My sprawling, multi-million-dollar manor now, technically speaking, although it absolutely did not feel like it belonged to me. It genuinely felt as though Grandmother Eleanor's gentle ghost was still peacefully wandering the expansive, echoing hallways. I sat quietly in her dark bedroom, completely surrounded by decades of framed family photographs. One specific, faded image caught my eye. It was me at exactly 7 years old, violently sobbing in Grandmother's warm arms. It was captured on the exact, agonizing day Veronica had packed her bags and permanently left me behind. My cellular phone suddenly vibrated on the antique nightstand. It was a text message originating from a completely unknown, blocked number. The message read, "Miss Hazel, I am a licensed private investigator. I have been aggressively retained by Veronica to look deeply into your personal background. I genuinely thought you deserved to know." My stomach instantly plummeted to the floor. Another message rapidly appeared. "She is aggressively searching for absolutely anything she can twist to destroy your credibility." I stared blankly at the glowing screen. Who on earth was sending this? Why would a hired investigator proactively warn their target? Before my brain could even begin to formulate a response, a third and final message appeared. "Watch your back at all times. She is infinitely more desperate for this money than you could possibly know." I sat completely paralyzed in the suffocating darkness of my grandmother's room, clutching my phone to my chest. Somewhere out there in the sprawling city, Veronica was already aggressively sharpening her knives for a slaughter, and I was entirely, utterly alone. Exactly 2 weeks later, the massive civil lawsuit officially arrived at my door. A tired courier physically handed me a thick, intimidating manila envelope while I was standing on the front porch of the coastal manor. Tucked inside was a highly formal, aggressive legal complaint officially filed with the Superior Court. Case number 2024 CV 1847. Veronica versus Hazel. The detailed allegations read exactly like a horrific, psychological thriller novel where I was permanently cast as the terrifying monster. Aggressive, undue influence over a mentally incapacitated, elderly individual. Systematic, malicious isolation of Eleanor from her loving, biological family members. Severe financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Fraudulent procurement of testamentary legal documents through sheer coercion. Veronica was aggressively, publicly claiming that grandmother Eleanor suffered from late-stage Alzheimer's disease. She claimed that I had systematically brainwashed her, that I had maliciously forged her signature on the final documents, and that I was essentially a calculating, master criminal. I immediately panic-dialed Silas. "I have already reviewed the filings," he stated, his voice incredibly calm but undeniably serious. "This is going to be an incredibly long, bloody war of attrition, Miss Hazel. 18 months at an absolute minimum before we even see a courtroom. Can she actually legally win this case? Not if the unvarnished truth actually matters. But absolute truth and the reality of courtrooms do not always perfectly align." He paused heavily. "Veronica has successfully retained the services of Miriam Sterling. She is notoriously expensive, incredibly ruthless, and highly aggressive in estate disputes." I heavily sank down onto grandmother's favorite floral armchair. "Why exactly is she doing this to me, Silas?" "It absolutely cannot be exclusively about the real estate money." Silas remained completely quiet for a very long, agonizing moment. "Then, Miss Hazel, your grandmother, and I engaged in many incredibly deep, confidential discussions over the past 30 years. She possessed highly specific, dark reasons for structuring the will the way she did, and she explicitly knew Veronica would predictably react in this exact, explosive manner. Then why on earth didn't she just write a letter explaining it to the family? Why didn't she leave a simple explanation? She actually did leave something incredibly vital behind," Silas stated incredibly carefully. "But she explicitly mandated that she wanted you to discover it entirely on your own, exactly when you were emotionally prepared to handle the fallout." "Find exactly what?" I demanded. Another heavy pause on the line. "Do you happen to recall the existence of your grandfather's private study?" My heart completely skipped a beat. Grandmother had frantically muttered something about it in the hospital. "But there is absolutely no private study anywhere inside this massive house. I know every inch of it." "There absolutely is," Silas stated firmly. "You simply have not discovered the entrance yet. I urge you to look closely inside the main library. Specifically examine the third, towering mahogany bookshelf. Search for a specific, antique, leather-bound volume of romantic poetry." The line went completely dead. Veronica absolutely did not wait for the sluggish court system to take action. She aggressively launched her own, highly coordinated offensive strike. By the third month of the legal battle, vicious, targeted rumors had successfully spread through absolutely every elite country club and wealthy charity gala in the entire county. I was absolutely no longer just a grieving granddaughter fighting a legal estate dispute. I was publicly branded as a vicious predator, a calculating manipulator, a soulless monster who had systematically isolated a helpless, senile old woman and maliciously stolen her family fortune. I violently learned about the massive extent of the smear campaign the absolute hardest way possible. An urgent email from my corporate architectural firm arrived on a mundane Tuesday morning. "Dear Hazel, we have recently received incredibly concerning, highly detailed information from an anonymous, external source regarding your personal and professional conduct. Pending an exhaustive internal investigation, we are immediately placing you on indefinite, unpaid administrative leave." I frantically called my direct supervisor, Janet. "What on earth is happening, Janet?" Her voice over the line sounded incredibly strained and deeply uncomfortable. Someone aggressively contacted the Human Resources Department. They explicitly claimed you suffer from severe, undiagnosed psychological issues and that you are currently under federal investigation for massive financial fraud against the elderly. They specifically referenced the ongoing civil lawsuit. That is my biological mother spreading toxic lies. She is maliciously attempting to destroy my life. Hazel, I personally want to believe you. But the senior corporate partners are incredibly nervous about elite clients catching wind of the scandal. She trailed off, her voice thick with pity. I am so incredibly sorry. My hands are completely tied on this matter. That indefinite administrative leave rapidly mutated into formal, permanent termination. Over the course of the following month, I desperately applied to 3 different, competing historical preservation firms in the city. Every single one of them rapidly rejected my application. Through a sympathetic former colleague, I finally learned the terrifying reason why. Someone had been proactively, aggressively calling ahead to the hiring managers, systematically poisoning the well before I even walked into the interview rooms. She explicitly warned them that you possessed a dark, hidden history of manipulating vulnerable, elderly clients to secure lucrative contracts, my former colleague whispered over the phone, sounding incredibly concerned and sincere. Veronica was absolutely not just trying to win a real estate lawsuit. She was aggressively, maliciously trying to permanently erase my ability to survive in society. That specific night, I sat completely alone in the massive, echoing kitchen of the coastal manor, mindlessly eating dry cereal for dinner because I had been far too deeply depressed to purchase actual groceries. The crushing silence of the massive house pressed down on my shoulders exactly like a physical, suffocating weight. My grandmother's frail, dying voice continuously echoed in my tortured memory. I have meticulously recorded absolutely everything, Hazel. What exactly did she record? What monumental secret was she desperately trying to communicate to me from beyond the grave? I slowly turned my head and looked down the long hallway toward the sprawling, 2-story library. The 3rd mahogany bookshelf. A specific volume of antique poetry. Tomorrow, I firmly decided. Tomorrow morning, I would finally uncover the truth. Veronica formally requested an in-person, sit-down meeting at the 6-month mark of the litigation to ostensibly discuss a potential financial settlement. Her aggressive attorney orchestrated the gathering. We met at a highly neutral, upscale bistro located in the bustling downtown district. Veronica arrived draped in designer morning attire, an expensive black silk blouse, tasteful pearl earrings, perfectly projecting the curated aesthetic of a devastated, grieving daughter. Arthur sat silently beside her, looking exactly like a well-trained, terrified lap dog. I sat directly across from them, completely alone. Veronica gracefully folded her manicured hands together on the table. Sweetheart, I absolutely do not want to endure this horrible ugliness any more than you do. Then proactively dropped the baseless, fraudulent lawsuit, I countered coldly. I absolutely cannot do that, Alara. Her smile was incredibly sympathetic and entirely, sickeningly rehearsed. But I can generously offer you a highly beneficial deal today. A strict 50-50 split of the assets. You receive exactly half the liquidated market value of the coastal manor, and I receive the remaining half. Absolutely everyone walks away relatively happy and secure. The final will was incredibly clear, Veronica. The will was violently drafted by a highly confused, terrified old woman suffering from dementia. Grandmother was absolutely not confused. Veronica's polished mask slipped for a tiny fraction of a microsecond. Something incredibly ugly and venomous violently flickered behind her eyes. You possess absolutely no idea what you are talking about. I explicitly know she was medically tested on a regular, recurring basis. Her mind was incredibly sharp until the very end. Medical tests can easily be faked. Corrupt doctors can easily be financially compensated. Veronica aggressively leaned forward across the small table. Do you genuinely, truly desire to drag this horrific mess through a public courtroom? Do you possess any idea what I will do to your already shattered professional reputation? You have already aggressively tried to destroy my career. Tried? She let out a soft, chilling laugh. Honey, I haven't even begun to truly initiate my campaign against you. Arthur nervously cleared his throat. Listen, Alara, this situation absolutely does not have to escalate and get significantly worse. Just accept the generous deal. Save yourself the immense financial and emotional trouble. I intensely looked at Arthur, at his sweating, pale forehead, his constantly darting, terrified eyes. He was undeniably scared. But exactly what was he so terrified of? I slowly stood up from the table. I will absolutely see both of you in court. Veronica's sharp, freezing voice followed me as I confidently walked toward the exit. You possess absolutely zero idea what I am truly capable of doing to you, Hazel. I paused at the glass door, turning back to face her one final time. Neither do you. I confidently left her sitting there, her aura of perfect composure visibly cracking just slightly around the edges. But her aggressive threat echoed violently in my mind for the entire drive back to the manor. Month 8 of the legal war. The exhausting lawsuit dragged on interminably. My meager personal savings severely dwindled. The crushing isolation deepened every single day. But Attorney Silas's cryptic words constantly haunted my waking hours. Look inside the main library. The third bookshelf. I had aggressively avoided the task for months. A massive part of my soul was utterly terrified of what explosive secret I might actually uncover. Another part of me felt entirely unready to face the reality of my family's darkness. That specific night, a massive coastal storm was violently battering the windows of the manor. I finally gathered my courage and slowly climbed the grand staircase to the second-floor library. The sprawling room smelled exactly like Grandmother Eleanor. Dried lavender and the distinct, comforting scent of decaying paper. Intermittent flashes of lightning illuminated towering rows upon rows of leather-bound, antique books. I slowly walked over to the third massive mahogany bookshelf and gently ran my trembling fingers along the worn spines. World history, ancient philosophy, classic literature. And then I saw it. A heavily worn, leather-bound volume of romantic poetry tucked inconspicuously between two massive encyclopedias. I gently pulled the book outward from the shelf. Click. An incredibly loud, heavy, mechanical sound echoed in the quiet room. It was soft, but undeniably distinct. The entire, massive mahogany bookshelf violently shuddered, and then slowly, impossibly, swung inward on hidden, silent hinges. Concealed directly behind the heavy wood was a solid oak door, covered in decades of thick, undisturbed dust. My heart violently pounded against my ribs. Grandmother's dying words at the hospital. Harrison's sanctuary. If you ever desperately need the answers to the puzzle, this was undeniably it. My late grandfather's legendary, hidden study. The mythical room that did not officially exist on any municipal blueprint. I forcefully pushed the heavy oak door open. The concealed space was incredibly small, perhaps measuring 10 feet by 10 feet, but it was absolutely packed from floor to ceiling with intense family history. A massive, antique wooden desk dominated the center. A heavily cracked, brown leather reading chair. Towering metal filing cabinets completely lined one wall. And resting squarely on the center of the desk, positioned exactly as if it had been patiently waiting for my arrival, was a heavy metal lockbox featuring a bright yellow sticky note attached to the lid. The handwriting was incredibly shaky, but unmistakably Grandmother Eleanor's script. For Hazel. To be opened exclusively when the time is right. My hands trembled violently as I popped the latch and opened the box. Tucked safely inside was a small, high-capacity USB digital drive, a tiny, outdated digital camera, and a handwritten letter heavily sealed inside a thick envelope. I slowly picked up the letter. My name was elegantly written across the front. Whatever explosive secrets were contained within this hidden room, she had intentionally, specifically preserved them exclusively for me. I was absolutely not fighting this battle alone, after all. The small room held significantly more terrifying secrets than I ever could have imagined. Situated against the far wall sat an ancient, bulky television monitor directly connected to what appeared to be a highly primitive, closed-circuit recording system, likely originating from the early 2000s. Thick black wires snaked aggressively across the floorboards, connecting directly to a much more modern, sleek laptop computer that had clearly been added much later. Grandmother Eleanor had aggressively upgraded her surveillance technology. She had been secretly, meticulously recording the events inside the manor for years. I slowly pressed the power button on the laptop. The illuminated desktop screen was meticulously organized with sheer, military precision. Dozens of digital folders were neatly labeled by specific years: 2012, 2013, 2014, sequentially all the way through to 2024. Contained inside every single folder were massive, high-definition video files. Dozens upon dozens of them. Over 200 individual digital recordings. I whispered aloud to the empty room, rapidly counting the files. But before I dared to watch a single frame of the footage, I desperately needed to read her final letter. I slowly settled into Grandfather Harrison's ancient, cracked leather chair and carefully broke the wax seal. My dearest, resilient Hazel, if you are currently reading these words, then my physical body is gone. And Veronica has predictably executed exactly what I mathematically knew she would do. She is fiercely fighting to steal the manor. She is aggressively claiming to the world that I was senile. She is maliciously attempting to completely destroy your life. I desperately want you to know the unvarnished truth. Veronica aggressively began borrowing massive sums of money from me back in 2012. Initially, it was relatively small, manageable amounts. $10,000 here, $20,000 there. She frantically claimed it was for unexpected, catastrophic emergencies. To cover Arthur's failing business ventures. To cover expenses I absolutely did not question, simply because she was my biological daughter. By 2015, I brutally realized I had entirely lost control of the situation. She aggressively manipulated me into signing dense legal papers while I was heavily recovering from major hip surgery, while my mind was still incredibly foggy from the heavy narcotics. She secured a massive power of attorney document granting her unrestricted access to my primary investment accounts. When I eventually discovered the theft and attempted to legally revoke her access, she violently threatened me. She explicitly stated that if I did not continue endlessly funding her lavish lifestyle, she would aggressively ensure that you, Hazel, never, ever visited me again. She threatened to spin horrific, toxic lies about me to ensure you hated me. I was physically weak. I was utterly terrified of losing my only granddaughter. So, I shamefully remained silent. But I was absolutely not a stupid woman. I systematically recorded absolutely everything, Hazel. Every single visit where she violently demanded money. Every single aggressive threat. Every single forged bank signature. The USB drive contains over 200 high-definition videos. I urge you to use them wisely to secure your freedom. I love you infinitely more than mere words can possibly convey. Grandma. I read the devastating letter 3 consecutive times. With every single pass, the horrifying words cut significantly deeper into my soul. 12 entire years. Veronica had been maliciously, aggressively draining my grandmother's finances for over a decade. Violently threatening her, psychologically manipulating her, and aggressively utilizing my existence as a weapon of extortion to ensure her compliance. My hands shook so violently I could barely manage to plug the small USB drive into the side of the laptop. The massive directory of files rapidly loaded. Over 200 video thumbnails, every single one meticulously dated and categorized. I tentatively clicked on the very first video file, dated January 15, 2012. The crystal-clear video displayed Grandmother Eleanor's main living room, the exact same living room I had joyously spent my entire childhood playing in. Veronica sat comfortably across from her, her legs elegantly crossed, her facial expression appearing incredibly pleasant and relaxed. "I just desperately need $10,000, Mama," Veronica stated smoothly. Arthur's luxury vehicle suddenly broke down again. "That is literally the third expensive car repair this year alone." Veronica, grandmother's voice sounded incredibly tired. "Well, these unfortunate things simply happen in life. You possess massive wealth. You can easily afford to help us." The brief video abruptly ended. I clicked on the next file. March 2012. Veronica aggressively demanding $15,000 for supposed emergency home foundation repairs. I rapidly jumped ahead several years. Video number 84, dated March 15, 2018. The entire atmosphere of the scene was drastically different. Grandmother Eleanor looked significantly older, noticeably frilier. Veronica's previously pleasant, manipulative mask was completely gone. "Just sign the damn check right now, Mother," Veronica aggressively hissed, leaning menacingly over the coffee table. "Veronica, this check is written for $75,000. I explicitly know exactly what the amount is. Sign it immediately." "What exactly is this massive sum of money required for?" Grandmother pleaded, shrinking back into her chair. Veronica's face twisted into an ugly, furious sneer. "Arthur currently possesses a massive, catastrophic problem. A severe, high-stakes gambling addiction. If I do not immediately cover his massive debts, certain dangerous individuals will be incredibly unhappy with us. Veronica, I absolutely cannot continue to drain my..." "You absolutely can." Veronica leaned closer, her eyes blazing with pure, unadulterated malice. "And you absolutely will sign it. Unless, of course, you want me to explicitly tell Hazel exactly what a pathetic, burdensome monster you truly think she is. Unless you want me to aggressively ensure she absolutely never steps foot inside this house to visit you ever again." Grandmother Eleanor's face completely crumpled in absolute agony. "Please, I am begging you, do not do this to me. Just sign the check." The horrifying video concluded with a close-up shot of Grandmother's violently trembling hand picking up a silver pen and signing the document. I sat completely paralyzed in the suffocating darkness of Grandfather Harrison's hidden study, massive, hot tears continuously streaming down my face. Veronica had not merely stolen financial assets. She had aggressively, systematically terrorized a helpless, elderly woman for over a decade. And now I officially possess the undeniable, explosive proof. Absolutely all of it. I spent the entirety of the next 3 days locked inside that hidden room, obsessively watching video after video. The psychological pattern was always sickeningly identical. Veronica would confidently arrive smiling. She would aggressively ask for massive sums of money, sometimes utilizing guilt trips, sometimes aggressively demanding and frequently resorting to violent, emotional threats. And Grandmother Eleanor would tragically capitulate every single time to protect her access to me. Video 102, 2019. Veronica explicitly forging Grandmother's legal signature on a massive international bank transfer document. "The old bat won't even remember executing this transaction anyway," she callously muttered to someone standing off camera. It was highly likely Arthur. Video 156, 2021. Veronica aggressively screaming at Grandmother for supposedly hiding liquid cash in a lockbox. "I explicitly know you possess more capital stashed away. Exactly where is it hidden?" Video 189, 2022. Veronica gleefully counting thick stacks of $100 bills she had maliciously uncovered inside a dresser drawer. Stupid, senile old woman, hoarding cash exactly like it's still the Great Depression. I meticulously utilized my accounting skills to total the explicit financial amounts verbally mentioned across all 200 videos. My highly conservative estimate, over $2.8 million had been maliciously stolen, extorted, and aggressively taken from a woman who was entirely too terrified and entirely too deeply in love with her own daughter to ever fight back. But the absolute most devastating video file in the entire collection was the very last one. Labeled File 210. Dated exactly 1 week prior to the day Grandmother Eleanor was rushed to the hospital. She sat entirely alone inside this exact hidden room, looking directly, unflinchingly into the camera lens. Her eyes appeared incredibly tired, but they were exceptionally clear. Sharper and more focused than I had seen them in years. If you are currently watching this video, Veronica, Grandmother's voice echoed powerfully in the small room. It explicitly means you have aggressively executed exactly what I mathematically predicted you would do. You are actively contesting my final will. You are publicly calling me senile and incompetent. You are maliciously attempting to steal absolutely everything from Hazel. She paused, taking a long, shaky, visibly painful breath. I desperately want you to know with absolute certainty that I was never, ever senile. I proactively submitted to comprehensive cognitive evaluations every 6 months without fail. Dr. Sterling possesses all of the certified medical records. I remained completely, undeniably of sound mind until the very bitter end. Her voice hardened into solid steel. I legally left my entire estate to Hazel because she was the absolute only human being in this bloodline who ever loved me entirely without demanding financial conditions. And you, Veronica? She slowly shook her head, tears glistening brightly in her eyes. You only ever viewed my existence as an automated teller machine. The powerful video ended. I gently closed the laptop screen and sat in the heavy silence. Grandmother had miraculously, posthumously handed me a lethal sword. Now, I simply had to strategically decide exactly how and when to swing it. But there was exactly one more video file I had not yet gathered the courage to watch. Buried deep inside a separate, encrypted digital folder labeled simply, Play Last. I found a file titled, For Veronica, when she is physically present in the room. I slowly clicked open the file. Grandmother Eleanor appeared on the screen wearing her absolute favorite, soft blue cardigan, the exact same sweater I had purchased for her on her 80th birthday. She looked directly, intensely into the camera lens, her facial expression completely serene, but carrying a profound, unfathomable sadness. Veronica, if Hazel is currently playing this specific video file, it explicitly means you are sitting directly across from her. You are highly likely sitting inside a formal courtroom or a sterile lawyer's office. You have been definitively caught. You explicitly know it. And your mind is currently frantically racing, trying to figure out exactly how to spin your way out of the impending disaster. She leaned significantly closer to the camera lens. Please allow me to save you the exhausting trouble. You absolutely cannot spin this. Her vocal tone remained incredibly steady, but I could clearly see her fragile hands trembling slightly in her lap. I possess over 200 high-definition videos meticulously documenting every single time you aggressively stole money from my accounts. Every single forged bank signature, every single violent threat, every single malicious lie. My primary estate lawyer already possesses encrypted copies. My personal forensic accountant possesses secure copies. The sheer volume of evidence is absolutely overwhelming. She paused, letting the devastating reality settle. You could desperately attempt to claim these digital videos are fabricated or doctored, Veronica. But they span over 12 entire years. They explicitly show your physical appearance naturally aging. They explicitly show the interior of the house structurally changing over time. They clearly display current dates and specific daily newspapers resting in the background. Absolutely any certified forensic expert will instantly confirm they are 100% authentic. Grandmother's eyes softened just for a fraction of a second. I genuinely, truly did not want it to ultimately end like this. I patiently granted you chance after chance after chance to simply stop the abuse, to choose to be a better human being. You absolutely never, ever took them. She aggressively straightened her spine, projecting absolute authority. So, here is exactly what is going to happen moving forward. You are going to immediately, voluntarily drop this fraudulent lawsuit. You are going to permanently leave Hazel entirely alone. And you are going to desperately pray to whatever God you believe in that she is merciful enough not to immediately press severe, federal criminal charges against you. Her final words were spoken barely above a fragile whisper. Goodbye, Veronica. I deeply hope that someday you truly understand the magnitude of exactly what you have permanently lost. The digital screen went pitch black. I meticulously saved this specific video into a separate, highly secure folder. This specific explosive device was strictly reserved for the mediation boardroom. By month 12 of the agonizing legal battle, Veronica dramatically escalated her public offensive. She aggressively organized what she offensively termed an elder abuse awareness charity luncheon at the highly exclusive Emerald Bay Country Club. She invited over 80 elite guests and multiple local press outlets. The sheer, unadulterated irony of the event would have been highly amusing if it wasn't so profoundly, toxically twisted. I learned about the lavish event through a highly sympathetic former colleague who still bravely answered my phone calls. Hazel, she is aggressively telling absolutely everyone in the industry that you systematically, cruelly isolated your grandmother, my former colleague whispered over the line. She is claiming that you psychologically manipulated a dying woman into aggressively altering her final will. People in the community are actually believing her narrative. I absolutely did not attend the event, but I eventually heard every single, sickening word of her speech secondhand. Veronica confidently took the grand podium draped in an expensive black designer dress, delicately dabbing at her perfectly dry eyes with a vintage lace handkerchief. My beloved mother was an incredibly wonderful, generous woman, she began, her voice quivering with expertly manufactured emotion. But in her final, fragile years, she tragically fell victim to someone she deeply, foolishly trusted. Her own biological granddaughter. Loud gasps of horror echoed from the wealthy audience, followed by deep, sympathetic murmurs. This specific girl, and I genuinely hesitate to even refer to her as family, aggressively, systematically cut my beloved mother off from absolutely everyone who genuinely loved her. She maliciously whispered toxic poison into her failing ears. She successfully convinced a deeply confused, elderly woman suffering from severe dementia to legally sign over her entire, massive fortune. Veronica's voice broke with absolutely perfect, theatrical timing. I am absolutely not fighting this brutal legal battle for the money. I never, ever was. I am fighting exclusively for profound justice. I am fighting to protect my beloved mother's eternal legacy. The gullible audience erupted into rapturous applause. Someone in the back row actually shouted, "We completely stand with you, Veronica." That exact same night, the barrage of hostile text messages commenced. My personal cell phone aggressively lit up with dozens of venomous texts originating from phone numbers I did not even recognize. Despicable gold digger. Disgusting predator. You absolutely belong in a federal prison. Your poor grandmother is violently weeping in heaven because of your unspeakable greed. However, one specific, isolated message completely stood out from the chaos. It originated directly from Aunt Beatrice's personal phone number. I completely, blindly believed Veronica's narrative until today. But something fundamental about this situation absolutely does not add up mathematically. Can we please sit down and talk? My trembling thumb hovered hesitantly over the reply button. Then another mysterious message arrived from the exact same unknown, blocked number that had warned me many months prior. She is becoming incredibly, terrifyingly desperate. Her massive gambling debts are significantly worse than you could possibly comprehend. The lavish charity luncheon was an absolute, desperate Hail Mary pass. Veronica was rapidly running out of time, and deeply desperate people inevitably make catastrophic mistakes. I simply had to patiently wait in the shadows for her to make hers. I urgently called Attorney Silas the very next morning. I possess absolutely everything we need to destroy her, I stated confidently. Over 200 high-definition videos, 12 years of undeniable, documented extortion evidence, her comprehensive, forged financial records, and her own damning words captured perfectly on camera. Silas was completely silent for a very long, heavy moment. What exactly do you desire to do with this mountain of evidence? I fiercely want to wait until the mandatory mediation hearing occurs. That specific hearing is still 4 entire months away, Silas cautioned. You could easily end this entire nightmare today. We could strategically leak a single, devastating video to the press. We could completely destroy her public narrative overnight. I vehemently shook my head, even though he could not physically see me over the phone. Absolutely no. I want Veronica to be forced to watch it happen in real time. I want her to be physically trapped in the room when her entire, curated universe violently falls apart. That is a surprisingly, terrifyingly strategic maneuver. Grandmother Eleanor successfully taught me the immense power of absolute patience. Silas let out a low, deeply impressed chuckle over the line. She certainly chose her successor incredibly well. For the entirety of the next 4 agonizing months, I meticulously built an impenetrable legal fortress. I aggressively hired a highly specialized, forensic corporate accountant to systematically trace every single illicit financial transaction Veronica had ever executed from grandmother's accounts. The total, verified, confirmed theft, over $3.1 million siphoned over a 12-year period. I legally obtained certified copies of grandmother's exhaustive cognitive medical assessments directly from Dr. Sterling. Perfectly clean, flawless cognitive results recorded every 6 months for the past entire decade. The exact same woman Veronica, publicly labeled as senile and incompetent, had effortlessly aced every single advanced mental acuity examination administered. I obsessively cataloged every single video file, meticulously cross-referencing the specific timestamps with the fraudulent bank statements, and constructed a master chronological timeline that was so incredibly bulletproof that even a first-year law student could flawlessly prosecute the case. And then I simply waited. Veronica aggressively continued her highly publicized, toxic public relations campaign. More lavish charity events. More tearful, exclusive interviews with prominent local newspapers. She was aggressively betting absolutely everything on manufacturing overwhelming public sympathy, entirely convinced that the crushing weight of the court of public opinion would inevitably force me into a panicked settlement. She possessed absolutely no idea that I was currently holding a live, nuclear weapon. The mandatory, court-ordered mediation hearing was finally scheduled for the 15th of March. It had been exactly almost 2 years since the frivolous lawsuit was initially filed. Both primary parties were strictly, legally required to be physically present. It was the absolute final attempt at a civil resolution before the case proceeded to a highly public, explosive trial. Veronica would absolutely be there. Arthur would absolutely be there. Aunt Beatrice had surprisingly agreed to attend the proceedings as a character witness for the family. And I would finally, aggressively show absolutely all of them exactly what grandmother Eleanor had left behind in the dark. The 15th of March arrived incredibly cold and overcast. The high-stakes mediation was hosted inside a sprawling, sterile conference room located at the Superior Courthouse. Neutral, heavily guarded ground. Buzzing fluorescent lights, a massive, imposing oak table that had undoubtedly witnessed 1,000 families violently tear each other apart over greed. I purposefully arrived significantly early with Silas. We meticulously set up our operation on one side of the massive table. Just the two of us, a sleek, modern laptop computer, and a massive, thick binder overflowing with irrefutable documents. Veronica aggressively swept into the room at exactly 9 o'clock. She was draped in a flawless, custom-tailored black designer suit, dripping in heavy gold jewelry, the absolute, perfect picture of affluent, devastated victimhood. Arthur trailed nervously behind her, looking incredibly gray, gaunt, and sickly. Something fundamental had visibly changed in his demeanor. He appeared significantly diminished, exactly like a man desperately struggling to carry a physical weight entirely too heavy for his spine to support. Directly behind them confidently strode opposing counsel Miriam Sterling. She wore a razor-sharp, aggressive business suit and possessed even sharper, calculating eyes. She had built her entire, intimidating career on executing highly aggressive, ruthless litigation and possessed a legendary reputation for never, ever losing a high-stakes estate dispute. Aunt Beatrice quietly slipped into the room last, tentatively taking a seat near the absolute back wall. She briefly caught my eye and offered a very small, incredibly uncertain, supportive nod. Judge Sterling, the highly respected, court-appointed mediator, sat firmly at the absolute head of the massive table. He was in his late 60s, possessing thick silver hair and a notorious, ironclad reputation for presiding over absolute, no-nonsense legal proceedings. This formal mediation is convened to determine whether a viable, mutual settlement can be successfully reached in case number 2024, CV 1847, he began, his voice echoing authoritatively. Both parties will be granted the opportunity to formally present their respective positions before we aggressively discuss potential financial terms. Opposing counsel Miriam stood up first, projecting absolute confidence. Your Honor, my client has miraculously endured nearly 2 entire years of severe, agonizing emotional torment. Her beloved mother's final, dying wishes were maliciously, aggressively corrupted by a calculating granddaughter who actively exploited a highly vulnerable, mentally diminished elderly woman. Veronica delicately dabbed at her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue right on cue. We fully intend to aggressively prove that Eleanor entirely lacked testamentary capacity. We will prove that Hazel exercised severe, undue psychological influence, and that this fraudulent will must be declared entirely null and void. Miriam confidently sat back down. Judge Sterling turned his intense gaze toward me. Miss Hazel, what is your formal response? I looked over at Silas. He offered a firm, microscopic nod. Your Honor, I stated incredibly quietly, my voice perfectly steady. We currently possess undeniable, hard evidence that tells a vastly, terrifyingly different story. Miriam was absolutely not finished controlling the room. Before the respondent is permitted to present any documentation, she stated smoothly, cutting me off. I would deeply like my client to address this court directly. Mrs. Veronica possesses highly critical, first-hand testimony regarding her mother's tragic final months. Judge Sterling nodded slowly. You may proceed. Veronica rose from her chair incredibly slowly, dramatically clutching a crumpled tissue exactly like a trained actor holding a crucial prop in a Broadway production. She slowly turned her body to address the entire room. Not just the judge, but specifically focusing her performance on Aunt Beatrice, Arthur, and anyone else who would listen. My beloved mother absolutely did not recognize my face at the bitter end. She began, her voice violently trembling with manufactured grief. She would stare completely blankly right through my body. She would repeatedly call me by incorrect names. She would entirely forget exactly who I was to her. She delicately dabbed her eyes again. But whenever she was in the presence of Hazel, she was miraculously always clear, always entirely lucid. Veronica's voice suddenly turned incredibly sharp and bitter. Doesn't that seem incredibly, highly suspicious to this court? That my mother only possessed cognitive clarity when her chief manipulator was physically present in the room? Aunt Beatrice visibly shifted uncomfortably in her seat against the wall. I noticed Arthur staring intensely, shamefully down at the floorboards. I desperately tried to visit her, Veronica continued, her voice rising in pitch. I desperately tried to be there to comfort her. But every single time I arrived at the estate, Hazel possessed some convenient, fabricated excuse to turn me away. She is currently resting. She is absolutely not feeling well today. Perhaps you should try visiting tomorrow. She pointed a shaking, accusatory finger directly at me. My beloved mother tragically died genuinely believing I had coldly abandoned her. Because this woman, this sociopathic girl, aggressively planted those toxic thoughts in her failing mind. She systematically isolated her and maliciously turned her completely against her own biological daughter. Veronica dramatically collapsed back into her chair, violently burying her face in her tissue, her shoulders heaving with fake sobs. Miriam looked incredibly satisfied with the performance. Your Honor, we currently possess dozens of sworn, signed affidavits from Mrs. Veronica's prominent friends confirming Eleanor's rapidly declining mental state. We firmly believe this systemic pattern of intentional isolation constitutes severe, prosecutable elder abuse. Judge Sterling methodically made a quick note on his legal pad. Miss Hazel, you are now permitted to respond to these severe allegations. I confidently stood up to my full height. My beloved grandmother was absolutely not senile. I stated incredibly calmly, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. She was absolutely not psychologically manipulated, and she was certainly never, ever isolated by me. I firmly placed my hand flat on top of the laptop computer. She was meticulously, systematically recording absolutely everything that occurred in that house. Veronica's head violently snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What exactly did you just say? Silas seamlessly connected the laptop computer to the massive, high-definition display screen mounted on the conference room wall. The large monitor violently flickered to life. Your Honor, I stated clearly. My late grandmother proactively left behind an enormous cache of digital video evidence. Over 200 high-definition recordings spanning a period of 12 entire years. I would highly like to play exactly one of those files for the court right now. The final, explosive video she intentionally recorded exactly 1 week prior to her death. Miriam half rose from her chair, panic finally creeping into her voice. Your Honor, we have absolutely received zero prior legal disclosure regarding the existence of any video evidence. This hidden evidence was only extremely recently discovered secured inside a completely hidden, locked room within the estate. Silas interjected incredibly smoothly, maintaining absolute professional calm. My client only recently gained the ability to access the files. Absolutely all digital materials will be comprehensively, fully disclosed to opposing counsel immediately following this session. Judge Sterling sat back and carefully considered the aggressive objection. I will permit the video to be played. Please proceed. I decisively clicked the play button. Grandmother Eleanor's image brightly appeared on the massive screen. She was sitting comfortably in Grandfather Harrison's hidden study, wearing her soft, familiar blue cardigan. Her eyes were incredibly clear, sharply focused, and entirely lucid. Veronica's entire body went absolutely, rigidly stiff. If you are currently watching this specific video, Veronica, grandmother's powerful, recorded voice completely filled the silent conference room. It explicitly means you have aggressively executed exactly what I mathematically predicted you would do. Veronica audibly gasped, whispering a terrified no. You have maliciously contested my final will. You have aggressively called me senile. You are maliciously attempting to steal absolutely everything from Hazel. The entire conference room fell utterly, terrifyingly silent. Aunt Beatrice's hand violently flew up to cover her mouth in shock. Arthur had gone completely, sickly pale. But I was absolutely never, ever senile. I proactively completed comprehensive cognitive evaluations every 6 months without fail. Dr. Sterling possesses all of the certified medical records. I remained completely, undeniably of sound mind until the very bitter end. Grandmother's facial expression hardened into pure, unyielding steel. I meticulously recorded absolutely everything, Veronica. Every single instance where you violently demanded money. Every single aggressive threat you made. Every single forged bank signature you executed. Over 200 highly detailed videos spanning 12 years. Veronica violently stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Turn that screen off immediately. This is an absolute, fabricated fake. Judge Sterling's voice cracked like a whip. Sit back down immediately, Mrs. Veronica. Grandmother's final, devastating recorded words played loudly over Veronica's frantic, hysterical protests. You are going to immediately, voluntarily drop this fraudulent lawsuit. You are going to permanently leave Hazel entirely alone. And you are going to desperately pray to God that she is merciful enough not to aggressively press severe criminal charges against you. The large screen abruptly went pitch black. Veronica stood completely frozen in terror, her flawless, curated composure violently shattered exactly like a dropped crystal vase. Your Honor, Silas stated incredibly calmly, seizing the moment. With your explicit permission, I would highly like to show exactly one additional, brief video from the massive collection. This specific file is dated March 15, 2018. Judge Sterling offered a grim nod. Proceed. The massive screen brightly lit up once again. It displayed grandmother's familiar living room. Veronica was aggressively leaning over a small coffee table, her face violently twisted with absolute, terrifying impatience and rage. Just sign the damn check right now, Mother. Veronica, this check is written for $75,000. I explicitly know exactly what the amount is. Sign it immediately. The entire courtroom watched in absolute horror as the Veronica on the screen violently threatened her own frail mother. They watched her maliciously invoke my existence as a weapon of emotional extortion. They clearly watched grandmother's frail hand violently tremble as she picked up the silver pen to sign the extortion payment. When the brutal video finally concluded, absolutely no one in the room moved a single muscle. Aunt Beatrice slowly, shakily stood up from her seat against the far wall. Her face was completely ashen, devoid of all blood. Veronica. Her voice violently cracked, sounding exactly like shattered glass. What in the name of God did you do? Veronica violently whirled around toward her younger sister. Beatrice, please, do not believe this. It is entirely taken completely out of context. Out of context? Aunt Beatrice's voice rose to an aggressive, hysterical scream. You were violently threatening her life. You were maliciously using Hazel too. Richard is the one who is in massive, catastrophic trouble. I possessed absolutely no other choice. Arthur violently stood up from his chair, his face contorting with rage. Do not you dare attempt to drag my name into this evil. Into this? Veronica violently spun around to face him, pure venom dripping from her words. This is entirely, completely your fault. Your massive, disgusting gambling addictions. Your horrific, hidden debts. My fault? Arthur's voice cracked in absolute desperation. I explicitly did not know you were aggressively stealing this magnitude of money. Over $3 million, Veronica. $3 million. The pristine conference room violently erupted into absolute chaos. Veronica aggressively screaming hysterically at Arthur. Arthur desperately backing away toward the heavy exit doors. Miriam frantically attempting to yell over the din to restore legal order. Aunt Beatrice sobbing violently against the back wall. Judge Sterling aggressively grabbed his heavy wooden gavel and slammed it violently against the mahogany table. Enough. Absolute, terrifying silence instantly fell over the room. He looked directly at Veronica with an expression of pure, barely concealed, unadulterated disgust. Mrs. Veronica, I strongly, aggressively suggest you immediately consult with your legal attorney regarding your highly limited, remaining options. This mediation session is officially in recess for exactly 15 minutes. Veronica heavily collapsed back into her leather chair, utterly defeated. I remained completely, utterly silent through the entirety of the explosion. I just sat there, quietly watching the carnage, vividly remembering every single vicious lie she had ever spread about my character, every single professional job I had unfairly lost, every single agonizing, sleepless night I had endured. Grandmother had been absolutely, undeniably correct. The unvarnished truth absolutely did not require you to scream. It simply required you to ensure it was finally heard. Now, I explicitly know you are absolutely dying to discover exactly what catastrophic move Veronica attempted to execute next. But before I reveal the ending, I want to hear directly from you. Do you genuinely believe that monsters like Veronica ever truly deserve an ounce of forgiveness? Comment NO if you strongly believe she should face the absolute, maximum legal consequences for her crimes, or yes, if you genuinely believe in the concept of second chances. I will absolutely read every single response. And please, ensure you have hit that notification bell, because the explosive conclusion of this story. It is absolutely not what you are expecting. Okay, let us finish this nightmare. The mandated 15-minute recess agonizingly stretched into 45 minutes. Through the thick glass walls of the conference room, I could clearly see Miriam and Veronica aggressively huddled together in the sterile hallway. Miriam's physical gestures were incredibly sharp, aggressive, and highly emphatic. Veronica's shoulders visibly slumped lower and lower toward the floor with every passing minute of the conversation. Arthur had already completely fled the courthouse. He did not even bother to say goodbye to his wife. Silas sat perfectly calmly beside me, exactly as unbothered as always. She is frantically, desperately calculating, he murmured quietly, pouring himself a glass of water. She is desperately trying to figure out if there is absolutely any microscopic loophole or way to spin this disaster in her favor. Is there any way out for her? I asked. Absolutely not. Not with that magnitude of verified, high-definition video evidence. If this case proceeds to a public trial, she will be utterly annihilated. And if the state prosecutor happens to view those specific recordings, he let the heavy, dark implication hang suspended in the air. Aggravated financial exploitation of an elderly individual. Massive felony criminal charges. Highly probable, lengthy state prison time. Finally, Miriam aggressively pushed the heavy glass door open and re-entered the room. Veronica slowly followed behind her, looking exactly as if she had physically aged a decade in under an hour. Miriam loudly cleared her throat, adjusting her suit jacket. Your Honor, after extensive, highly realistic consultation with my client, we have formally decided to unconditionally withdraw the lawsuit in its entirety. The heavy, monumental words hung suspended in the quiet air. Judge Sterling offered a very slow, Grim nod of his head. Let the official court record show that case number 2024, CV 1847 is voluntarily, unconditionally dismissed with prejudice by the plaintiff. He slowly turned his piercing gaze toward Veronica. Mrs. Veronica, I sincerely trust you fully comprehend the massive, severe implications of exactly what was presented in this room today. Veronica did not utter a single syllable in response. She simply stared blankly at the mahogany table exactly as if she actively prayed it might magically open up and swallow her whole. I slowly stood up. For nearly 2 entire years, I had obsessively, daily imagined exactly how this triumphant moment would feel. The glorious triumph, the profound, righteous vindication. But actively looking at Veronica, completely defeated, utterly humiliated, violently stripped of every single polished lie she had ever told, I absolutely did not feel a shred of triumph. I simply felt incredibly, overwhelmingly tired and, strangely, profoundly empty. Mrs. Veronica, I stated incredibly quietly. She violently flinched at the sound of my voice, but absolutely refused to look up at my face. I am absolutely not going to aggressively pursue severe, federal criminal charges against you. Her head violently snapped upward in pure shock. Miriam's eyebrows skyrocketed toward her hairline. Absolutely not, because you deserve an ounce of human mercy, I continued, maintaining my icy composure. But entirely because Grandmother Eleanor explicitly did not want me to mutate into the kind of monster who actively destroys other people's lives for sport. She deeply wanted me to aggressively protect my own peace, absolutely not to seek petty, destructive revenge. Veronica's mouth opened wide, but absolutely no words managed to escape her throat. I calmly turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room. The bustling courthouse hallway felt fundamentally, physically different as I confidently walked through it. The harsh fluorescent lights seemed infinitely softer. The massive, suffocating weight I had aggressively carried for 2 entire years lifted completely from my shoulders, pound by agonizing pound. Silas quickly caught up to me at the elevator bank. That was an incredibly, profoundly generous concession on your part, he noted quietly. Significantly more mercy than she inherently deserved. It was absolutely not done for her benefit, I replied. It was done exclusively for my own soul. He nodded slowly, a warm smile touching his eyes. Your grandmother would be so incredibly, profoundly proud of the woman you are. Aunt Beatrice suddenly appeared from around a distant corner. Her eyes were violently red-rimmed, her expensive makeup heavily smeared across her face. She approached me incredibly hesitantly, exactly as if she fully expected me to scream and run away. Hazel. Aunt Beatrice, I am so profoundly, deeply sorry. Her voice violently broke into a sob. For all these agonizing years, I blindly, foolishly believed Veronica's toxic lies. I cowardly stood by her side when I absolutely should have. She couldn't even finish the sentence. A massive, primal part of my soul desperately wanted to aggressively walk away from her. To viciously punish her for every single cold shoulder, every highly suspicious glance, and every single time she actively chose biological blood over the undeniable truth. But I intensely thought of Grandmother Eleanor, of her quiet, unyielding strength. Her infinite patience. You genuinely did not know the truth, I stated finally. Veronica successfully, brilliantly fooled absolutely everyone in her orbit. That absolutely does not excuse my horrible behavior. No, it absolutely does not. I met her tear-filled eyes. But I am incredibly, profoundly exhausted from carrying toxic grudges. I watched exactly what carrying that level of bitterness ultimately did to Veronica's soul. I absolutely do not want that dark existence for myself. Aunt Beatrice's face completely crumpled in relief. Is there absolutely any microscopic chance we could attempt to slowly start over? I know I explicitly do not deserve the chance, but I honestly do not know the answer to that right now, I replied entirely honestly. Perhaps. But it is going to require a massive amount of time and hard work. She nodded her head rapidly in frantic agreement. Time? Yes, absolutely. Of course. Whatever magnitude of time you require. I confidently stepped onto the waiting elevator. Aunt Beatrice respectfully did not attempt to follow me inside. As the heavy metal doors slowly began to slide shut, I caught one absolute, final, fleeting glimpse of Veronica standing alone in the distant hallway. Miriam was aggressively speaking to her, but Veronica was absolutely not listening to a single word. She was staring directly at my face. For just a fraction of a second, I genuinely thought I saw a flicker of an emotion deep in her eyes. Profound regret, suffocating shame, or perhaps just burning, violent anger at finally getting caught. The heavy doors slammed shut with a final click before I could definitively decide. It absolutely did not matter to me anymore. The social fallout following the mediation was incredibly swift, brutal, and utterly merciless. Within a single week of the hearing, the explosive, scandalous word rapidly spread through the absolute highest echelons of the city's elite social circles. Absolutely no one needed to maliciously leak the actual video files to the press. The shocked individuals present in that specific courtroom aggressively talked, and that was more than enough to ignite the inferno. Veronica was aggressively forced to resign in total disgrace from her prestigious, highly visible board positions on the Women's Foundation and the prestigious Children's Hospital Auxiliary Board. Both elite organizations released highly sanitized, carefully worded public statements regarding aggressively pursuing new, alternative leadership directions. Absolutely everyone intimately knew exactly what the statements truly meant. Her highly coveted, elite country club membership was immediately suspended pending a permanent review. Translation: do not ever show your face on these grounds again. The affluent, charity luncheon friends who had eagerly, blindly rallied to her toxic cause suddenly, miraculously could not return any of her frantic phone calls. Elite social invitations instantly, completely dried up. The highly sympathetic, local journalist who had previously covered her fraudulent, elder abuse awareness campaign rapidly published a very different, highly devastating follow-up exposé piece. And Arthur? Arthur formally filed for a brutal, contested divorce exactly 3 weeks later. The official legal papers cited mundane, irreconcilable differences, but the absolute, unvarnished truth aggressively leaked through his ruthless divorce attorney. He was aggressively, desperately attempting to legally distance his own assets from any potential, looming criminal liability. He had been comfortably married to Veronica for 12 long years, and he loudly, publicly claimed he absolutely never possessed an ounce of knowledge regarding the massive extent of her financial manipulation. I absolutely did not believe his cowardly claims entirely, but I also completely did not care what happened to him. Silas constantly called my phone with chaotic updates every few days, regardless of whether I specifically asked for them or not. Veronica is currently desperately attempting to liquidate some minor real estate property, he reported one sunny afternoon. It highly looks like the aggressive creditors are rapidly circling her. What exact creditors? I asked. Arthur's massive, hidden gambling debts. It brutally turns out she was actively, aggressively covering his massive losses, exclusively utilizing your grandmother's stolen money. Now that the stolen capital is entirely gone. I sat and thought deeply about that revelation. Veronica had aggressively spent years maliciously stealing from a helpless elderly woman simply to prop up a lavish, artificial lifestyle completely built upon a foundation of toxic lies. Now, the entire, fragile house of cards was violently collapsing down upon her head. Should I genuinely feel deeply sorry for her suffering? I asked. Silas remained completely quiet for a long moment. That is absolutely not really a legal question, Miss Hazel. No, it absolutely wasn't. But proudly standing in my grandmother's vibrant garden, peacefully watching the beautiful spring flowers aggressively push through the dark soil, I profoundly found that I did not feel an ounce of sorrow for her at all. I simply felt completely, utterly free. Exactly 1 month following the explosive mediation, I finally returned to the dusty, hidden study. There was absolutely still so much history I had not meticulously gone through. Towering metal filing cabinets, completely overflowing with aged documents, countless dusty photo albums, and stacks of unread letters. Grandmother Eleanor had meticulously kept absolutely everything. I was carefully sorting through the bottom of a heavy desk drawer when I unexpectedly found yet another, hidden folder. This specific one was labeled simply in thick black marker, about Veronica. The absolute truth. Tucked safely inside the folder was a single, encrypted digital video file. I hesitated for a moment. A massive part of my soul genuinely felt exactly like I had already seen entirely enough trauma. Another part of me intrinsically knew I absolutely hadn't. I aggressively clicked play. Grandmother Eleanor appeared on the digital screen looking significantly older and noticeably frilier than in any of the other recorded videos. This was clearly highly recent, perhaps recorded just mere months prior to her final hospital admission. "Hazel," she began, her voice weak but steady. "There is something horrific I absolutely never told you regarding exactly why Veronica aggressively left you behind." My breath completely caught in my throat. You were exactly 7 years old. Veronica had recently met Arthur. He possessed massive, generational wealth back then, or at the very least, he successfully projected the illusion of it. He explicitly, coldly stated he absolutely did not want to raise another man's biological child. I unfortunately already intimately knew this specific part of the story, or at least I thought I did. But that was absolutely not the true, primary reason. Grandmother's voice violently trembled on the recording. The absolute, real reason was that Veronica explicitly told me that your very existence had completely ruined her entire life. She aggressively claimed that if she hadn't foolishly gotten pregnant at 25, she could have actually been someone important, could have achieved something massive. The brutal words hit my chest exactly like physical, violent blows. She explicitly wanted to permanently abandon you with me, but she aggressively demanded heavy financial compensation in return. Grandmother let out a dark, utterly bitter laugh. My very own biological daughter maliciously demanded that I pay her a massive ransom simply to give up her own child. I literally could not pull oxygen into my lungs. I desperately agreed to the horrific terms. I aggressively paid her exactly $100,000 in cash, and I swore a blood oath that I would absolutely never, ever reveal the truth to you. Massive tears rapidly ran down grandmother's aged cheeks. But you inherently deserve to know the unvarnished truth, Hazel. Veronica did not merely coldly abandon you to the wolves. She literally, mathematically sold you for a payout. The devastating video ended. I sat entirely paralyzed in the suffocating silence of that hidden room, desperately processing exactly what I had just learned. My biological mother had absolutely not just selfishly left me behind. She had literally, aggressively put a concrete, financial price tag on my existence, and my grandmother had selflessly, secretly paid the massive ransom simply to keep me safe. Exactly 2 weeks later, Aunt Beatrice cautiously came to visit the manor. I was peacefully kneeling in the garden, grandmother's vibrant garden, aggressively pulling thick, stubborn weeds from the sprawling rose beds. The bright spring sun felt incredibly warm and healing on my face, and for the absolute first time in nearly 2 years, I felt an emotion that closely resembled genuine peace. Beatrice's car slowly pulled into the long gravel driveway. She hesitantly got out, nervously holding a small, battered wooden box. "Hazel, do you possibly have a spare minute to talk?" I slowly stood up, carefully brushing the dark dirt from my bruised knees. "Of course I do." We sat together on the sunlit patio, drinking sweating glasses of iced tea in the thick afternoon heat. Beatrice kept nervously, obsessively touching the small wooden box resting in her lap exactly as if she feared it might suddenly sprout legs and escape if she let go. "I desperately need to tell you something highly important," she stated finally, her voice shaking. "Something I absolutely should have confessed to you years ago." "Okay." She slowly opened the creaking wooden box. Tucked safely inside was a massive bundle of paper envelopes, severely yellowed and brittle with extreme age. Perhaps 30 or 40 individual envelopes in total. "These are canceled bank checks," Beatrice stated incredibly quietly. "Checks actively written from my personal account directly to your grandmother every single month for over 20 years. I stared at her in absolute, profound confusion. "I honestly do not understand what you mean. When Veronica maliciously abandoned you with Mama, I explicitly knew the truth. I knew with absolute certainty that Veronica would never, ever send a single dime of financial support to help raise you. So, I secretly did it instead." She pulled out a fragile, aged envelope and showed me the canceled check inside. $200. Dated exactly 1998. I absolutely never told a single soul about the arrangement. Not Veronica. Not even your grandmother actually knew exactly who was sending the funds at first. I meticulously sent the money entirely anonymously for the first 5 agonizing years. But why on earth did you do that? Beatrice's eyes rapidly filled with heavy, hot tears. Because you were a terrified, innocent 7-year-old child, and your own mother had just callously walked away from your existence. And I was completely, utterly powerless to do anything to physically stop Veronica's cruelty. But I absolutely could do this small thing for you. I stared at the massive box of aged envelopes. 20 entire years of aggressive, quiet financial support. 20 entire years of profound, silent love originating from a woman I had falsely, entirely believed had maliciously chosen Veronica's side over my survival. Grandmother never breathed a single word of this to me. She eventually, successfully deduced exactly who the anonymous donor was, but I aggressively begged her to maintain the absolute secret. I was utterly terrified that Veronica would discover the betrayal. Sometimes, family absolutely manages to surprise you in the most beautiful ways. Exactly 3 months following the explosive mediation, a letter finally arrived from Veronica. It was a plain, sheep white envelope, lacking any return address, but I instantly recognized the aggressive, looping handwriting. The exact same looping script that had falsely signed my childhood birthday cards back when she still pathetically pretended to play the role of a mother. I slowly opened the envelope while standing at the kitchen counter. Hazel, I explicitly know I absolutely do not deserve the right to write to you, but I literally possess absolutely no one else left in this world. Arthur formally left me. My elite friends absolutely refused to speak a single word to me. Beatrice has completely ignored my frantic phone calls for weeks. I am absolutely not writing this to fabricate pathetic excuses. I explicitly know that exactly what I did was profoundly wrong. I explicitly know I deeply hurt your soul. I explicitly know I horribly hurt Mama. But I am absolutely still your biological mother. Doesn't that biological fact inherently count for something in this universe? I just desperately want to sit down and talk, to attempt to explain my actions, to desperately attempt to make things somewhat right, if that is even mathematically possible anymore. Please, Hazel. I possess absolutely nothing left. I only have you. Veronica. I read the pathetic, desperate letter exactly 3 times. Then, I calmly sat down at grandmother's antique writing desk and meticulously composed my final reply. Veronica. I formally received your letter. I have thought incredibly carefully about exactly what to say in response. You are absolutely, entirely right that you do not deserve the privilege to write to me. You are also entirely right that you violently hurt me and you maliciously abused Grandma in horrific ways that can absolutely never, ever be undone in this lifetime. But here is exactly what you are fundamentally, catastrophically wrong about. You are absolutely, undeniably not my mother. Not in any conceivable way that actually matters to the human soul. You permanently, aggressively surrendered that specific title exactly 24 years ago, on the exact day you literally traded my existence for a $100,000 payout. Yes, I explicitly know absolutely everything about that transaction now. I absolutely do not hate you. Harboring active hatred requires a massive expenditure of psychological energy, and I have violently wasted entirely enough energy on your existence already. But I also possess absolutely nothing left to give to you. Please, do absolutely not ever attempt to contact me again. Hazel. I aggressively sealed the envelope, confidently walked to the mailbox, and sent it out. Then, I calmly went back out to the garden, knelt in the dirt, and continued planting fresh seeds. Sometimes, deeply rotten roots absolutely must be violently severed in order for new, healthy life to successfully grow. Exactly 6 months later, the Eleanor Legacy Garden officially opened its grand iron doors to the public. I purposefully named the foundation after my grandmother's beautiful middle name, the exact name I had always deeply loved, the specific name she had softly asked me to utilize if I ever desired to honor her memory. The sprawling, eastern wing of the massive coastal manor was completely transformed into a vibrant community center. The sprawling, multi-acre grounds became an interactive, educational teaching garden. Every single Saturday morning without fail, underprivileged children from the city's most forgotten, underserved neighborhoods arrived by the busload to eagerly learn about cultivating plants, about the power of patience, and about aggressively growing something incredibly beautiful from absolutely nothing but dark soil and warm sunlight. Aunt Beatrice happily assisted me with the official ribbon-cutting ceremony. She had been visiting the estate every single weekend now, incredibly tentatively at first, but slowly gaining significantly more confidence. We were absolutely not the exact same people we were before the explosion, but we were actively, beautifully building something entirely new. I stood proudly in the lush garden that sunny afternoon, quietly watching a chaotic group of 8-year-old children aggressively argue over who earned the privilege to water the ripe tomatoes. Their joyous, innocent laughter echoed brilliantly off the ancient, historic brick walls. My cellular phone vibrated in my pocket. It was an urgent, professional email from my former architectural preservation firm. We would absolutely love to urgently discuss bringing you back onto the team. Senior executive position. Your absolute choice of elite projects. I smiled a genuine, radiant smile and rapidly typed my response. Thank you so incredibly much for the generous offer, but I have already successfully found my ultimate life project. Later that exact same evening, I stood silently in the grand, main hallway, directly in front of grandmother's massive, oil-painted portrait. The towering painting had been hanging in that exact spot for as long as my memory stretched backward. Eleanor Margaret Vance, captured brilliantly in oil and canvas at exactly 60 years old. I completely understand absolutely everything now, I whispered softly to the painted image. You absolutely did not merely leave me a massive house and a fortune. You intentionally left me a brand new beginning. I thought deeply about absolutely everything she had violently endured. The massively stolen money, the horrific, aggressive threats, the biological daughter who viewed her existence as absolutely nothing but a lucrative source of income. And through absolutely all of the darkness, she had fiercely protected my future, she had meticulously prepared for my survival, and she had unconditionally loved me. I am going to aggressively make this sprawling place truly matter in the world, I promised her painting. For all the forgotten kids who desperately need a safe place to belong, exactly like I once did. The static portrait obviously did not offer an answer, but I swear on my life, just for a fleeting moment, her painted eyes seemed to glow significantly warmer in the dim light. Spring has officially arrived once again at the Coastal Manor grounds. The massive, sprawling garden is currently in spectacular, full bloom. Vibrant, blood-red roses, towering tulips, and the deep purple lavender that grandmother always passionately loved. Joyous children frantically run through the winding dirt paths every single weekend, their small, eager hands covered completely in dark soil, their young faces shining incredibly bright with the thrill of discovery. I have learned an incredible, profound amount over the past 2 transformative years. I have learned deeply about the true meaning of family, about the devastating nature of ultimate betrayal, and about the massive, fundamental difference between the specific people who happen to share your biological blood, and the specific people who actually aggressively show up to protect you. Here is exactly what I intrinsically know now. Absolutely not everyone who casually calls themselves your family will actually treat you with the basic respect of family. Some deeply broken individuals purely view love as a cold, calculated transaction. They view human beings as assets to violently exploit and relationships as leverage to aggressively trade. They will maliciously take and take and take from your soul until there is absolutely nothing left but a hollow shell, and then they will aggressively blame you when the well inevitably runs completely dry. That horrific behavior absolutely does not mean that you are somehow inherently unworthy of being loved. It explicitly means that they were simply, fundamentally psychologically incapable of giving it. Grandmother Eleanor deeply understood that she absolutely could not magically fix Veronica. She explicitly knew she could not forcefully mold her biological daughter into a fundamentally different, empathetic person. But she absolutely could aggressively protect me from the catastrophic, radioactive fallout. She could meticulously leave behind the undeniable evidence, the unvarnished truth, and the massive financial resources required to aggressively build something meaningful from the ashes. She could proactively love me in the exact, fierce manner I inherently deserve to be loved. And in the very end, that is exactly the beautiful gift I am aggressively passing forward into the universe. Every single disadvantaged kid who walks through these heavy garden iron gates learns the exact same, profound life lesson. You can absolutely grow something incredibly, breathtakingly beautiful, even when you are planted in violently broken, toxic soil. If you have ever been violently forced to establish ironclad, terrifying boundaries with someone who absolutely should have loved you significantly better, or if you are currently still agonizingly figuring out exactly how to execute that survival maneuver, I desperately want to hear your personal story. Please drop your experiences in the comments section below. You are absolutely, undeniably not alone in the darkness, and your specific experience profoundly matters in this world. Thank you so incredibly much for staying by my side and listening until the absolute bitter end of this journey. Please, always remember this fundamental truth. You absolutely do not have to aggressively defeat the monsters to win the war. Sometimes, the ultimate, truest victory simply means finally finding the courage to discover exactly who you are again. I will see you all in the next story.